corner the orphanage market, automate it with robot workers to take care of the kids, create a rating system for potential adoptive parents to rate the baby's vibe, fire babies who fail said vibe check, zero severance, obviously, make wild claims about future profitability, and before you know it, boom, it's IPO time. Innovative, profitable orphanages. But the truth is, for many of those engaged in gig work, it's not a side job, it's their main source of income, and that can be a real problem when you consider that delivery apps classify their workers as independent contractors, meaning they have to pay for all of their own expenses, and as this guy in New York explains, that can be a lot.
The bike itself cost between $1,800 and $1,900 new. I upgraded it in many ways. For example, the seat, the phone holder, so I can have it over here. This battery cost me almost $450, so the total would be up to $2,500. Because if only the bike costs $1,800 plus the battery, that's $2,200. And I had to buy the backpack because the companies don't give you one. And a helmet, because they don't give you one either.
Look, that is all ridiculous, but the backpack might be the most egregious part there. This is a backpack you can't use for anything else. Imagine using it for school, unless you're a second grader who shows up every day with a social studies book, a PB&J, and 13 orders of pad ki mao. It doesn't really work. But the expenses are just the beginning here. Workers are also at the mercy of the app's opaque algorithms, which are used to dictate speed, behaviour, and ultimately the wages of the workers. Many apps set up a game-like system of rewards and penalties, offering high scores for being on time and low scores and fewer orders for tardiness. And of course, a significant part of that system is negative reviews. You might think a bad review is going to a restaurant or the app itself, but all workers know getting one can severely restrict your options going forward. In fact, just a few negative responses have the power to dry up worker income or even get them booted off the platform altogether. And those who've studied this will tell you that dynamic is a significant problem.
Much of reputation systems were put in place to be able to give consumers reviews of products. That doesn't transfer well to workers' effort, turning it into the equivalent of evaluating whether we got a good coffee. That place where there's slippage between a product and a person's labor is dangerous.
We'll replace the tyranny of the boss with tyranny of an algorithm. And that is much worse, I will tell you. As a computer scientist, I will tell you that that's much worse.
Right, that is a terrible system. Workers have even called the algorithm the Patron Phantasma, or Phantom Boss, which sounds like a reality show on Max that somehow already has 12 seasons. And this downward pressure is a big part of why you might see delivery workers speeding or going the wrong way down a street on their bike. The clear incentive is to make as many orders as you can, as quickly as you can, even if that means compromising safety. And speaking of safety, these jobs can be risky. In cities like New York, delivery workers are constantly dodging traffic and have been robbed and attacked. And that's even before people ask them to bring them food through extreme weather like blizzards and even floods. And by the way, don't do that. If you see a flash flood warning pop up on your phone and immediately open Grubhub, sorry, you don't get to go to heaven. That was the test. And you failed it. It is frankly no wonder that delivery driving is among the deadliest occupations in the country. And because these workers are independent contractors, apps don't have to pay for their health insurance. In fact, one survey found that of those who'd experienced a work-related injury, 3 out of 4 delivery workers said they paid for medical care out of their own pocket, all of which can lead to things like this supposedly heartwarming human interest story from January about a video that had gone viral.
Bro, what are you doing? Are you serious?
I got bills to pay, bro.
I respect that, dude. That's crazy.
This is how Kevin Ross has been making a living, delivering food on a bike with a broken foot. Watch as he straps a walker onto the bike so he has support when he goes inside restaurants. Back in September, Kevin says he was making a delivery for Grubhub when he was hit by a car.
I got hit. I blacked out. Next thing I know, I'm in the hospital.
He needed surgery, and doctors told him recovery would take months. But with hardly any savings, he had no choice but to get back to work.
Well, hold on. No choice? What do you mean? Grubhub says they're all about giving their delivery workers choice. They get to choose their own hours, choose to run a red light rather than be punished by the algorithm, and they get to choose to get back to work while severely injured instead of facing crushing medical bills. They've got more choices than Sophie. Haven't seen the movie. So workers are vulnerable because they lack labour protections and health insurance, and all of this risk is in service of a job where, like, unfortunately, most service jobs, most of their income comes in the form of tips, which can make up a third to half of their total earnings. But the thing is, those tips obviously aren't guaranteed. The Verge interviewed a delivery worker who reported biking from 77th Street on the Upper East Side, 18 blocks south and over the Queensborough Bridge, then up through Long Island City and over another bridge to Roosevelt Island, all to deliver a single slice of cake for no tip at all. And look, I get that if you're ordering delivery on a single slice of cake, you are clearly going through something, because that is the single saddest order any human being could make. But you got a fucking tip. And at this point, you're probably thinking, wow, these companies are driving restaurants and delivery workers to ruin just to make massive profits. So you might be surprised to hear this.
We should start by acknowledging that today Uber Eats does not make money.
Janelle Salinave is head of Uber Eats.
We've been very public about the fact that it's not yet profitable.
And neither are her competitors.
The platforms themselves lose a ton of money in the hundreds of millions of dollars, billions collectively.
Why does this business even make sense?
I'm not sure it does. And I think they're still trying to figure out how to make money at this, even today.
Wow. They're still trying to figure out how to make money at this. These are companies valued at billions of dollars, and yet they're being talked about the same way you talk about your cousin who sells jewellery on Etsy. And while that might sound counterintuitive, it actually makes perfect sense. Because the old menus in a drawer form of delivery set certain firm limits. It involved one restaurant directly hiring a delivery worker who then delivered food to a limited area. But these apps introduce whole new categories of cost to the equation, from marketing to lobbying to building and maintaining a whole website. And they're basically following the classic tech disruptor model of using Wall Street money to grow at all costs, corner a market, undercut their competitors, and then buy them up, all with the ultimate goal of monopolising the sector and then massively raising prices. Think about how Uber and Lyft used to be much cheaper than traditional taxis, and then, once they dismantled that model, they jacked their prices way up. We're just at the point in the cycle where companies can lose a ton of money, keep prices low for consumers, even as they try and offset that by squeezing restaurants and delivery workers at the bottom. But the consolidation era has very much begun. Uber Eats bought Postmates, DoorDash bought Caviar, and Grubhub merged with Seamless. In fact, Grubhub and DoorDash alone comprise more than 20 companies that once competed with one another. And some of these companies will tell you that they're now either breaking even or turning a slight profit, though some of those claims have significant caveats to them. But in general, we're currently in a weird situation where the restaurants are losing out, the delivery workers are losing out, and even the companies are struggling. The main winner so far has actually been us, the customers. Because as this business journalist points out, we're getting an incredibly convenient service and paying less than it's technically worth.
I call this the millennial lifestyle subsidy, right? Every single time that you're using DoorDash or using Uber, you're getting a little bit of money back from these companies. They're saying, we're never going to charge you as much as the service actually costs. So I think it's ironic, I think it's interesting, and I also think it just can't last.
And he's probably right. Though personally, I find it a little hard to get mad at the idea of millennials getting some sort of subsidy in life. After all, this is a group who will never be able to afford a house, is drowning in student debt, and can't even enjoy Harry Potter anymore. You can't spell millennial without 3 massive L's. But if it truly is the case that we're headed to a point where a few massive companies dominate this industry, now might be the time to talk about putting some real guardrails up. And I will say, some places are trying. Here in New York, thanks to the hard work of, among others, a collective of delivery workers called Los Deliveristas Unidos, the city passed a law that guarantees a minimum pay rate for delivery workers. But the apps haven't made it easy. Once that rule rolled out, they increased their fees to users and restaurants and tried to reduce the end price to the consumer by making it harder to find the tipping option. If you live in New York, check to make sure you're still tipping people, because it's possible that you're not. And in California, the state passed a law in 2019 expanding protections to gig workers. But some of the big delivery apps, along with rideshare companies and others, pushed a ballot proposition called Prop 22 that would carve themselves out of that law. And they went all out to get it passed.
The latest data from the Secretary of State's office show Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, and Instacart have spent more than $184 million combined campaigning for Prop 22.
It is very David and Goliath, if you will. These billionaire corporations spending so much money to exempt themselves from basic labor protections. It tells you what it's worth to them.
Right. It does tell you what it's worth to them. At least $184 million. And that's a fuck ton of money. That's as much as, and this is true, this racehorse. Think about that. They're denying workers basic labour rights when instead they could be getting in on the ground floor of this horse. And I get it. I get where that valuation's coming from. And the sad thing is, that ballot initiative passed, and it could be very hard to undo, given it requires a 7/8 vote in both the State Assembly and Senate to amend it in any way, which is unprecedented. Although that part, at least, may hopefully get overturned by California's Supreme Court later this year. And there are fights brewing in other places, including Seattle, which is considering rolling back worker protections, and Massachusetts, where several apps are pushing for a Prop 22-style ballot initiative this November. But while these issues get addressed at the federal, state and city level, it might also be worth talking about what you yourself can do in the meantime. Because I am not saying you shouldn't use delivery apps. A lot of people rely on them, from working parents to disabled people to people who are, like me right now, baked out of their fucking minds. But the fact is that it's just too easy to use these apps while completely forgetting the actual human beings behind them whose fates you control by just pressing a button. So when it comes to restaurants, if there is one that you like to order from, ask if there is a way that they would rather you do that than through an app, and if there is, do it. And when it comes to delivery workers, remember, bad reviews can directly impact their livelihood. So I would go with 5 stars across the board. Basically, if you're rating anything less than 5 stars, there has to be visible semen in your food. And you have to be absolutely sure that it's not just a glaze. And even then, I'd still go with 4 stars. And while this should go without saying, you have to tip. And if you're making someone cross multiple bridges with a single piece of cake, first, I'm so sorry about whatever is going on in your hectic life, but you need to tip even more. And if we all do this, then and only then will we be able to say with a clear conscience, oh, thank God, the food's here. Our main story tonight concerns student loans, the biggest thing you leave college with besides a diploma and a drinking problem. Student debt is such a massive issue in this country that a few years ago, Burger King had a program dubbed Whopper Loans, where lucky people could get up to $500 of their loans repaid, which they promoted with video of their mascot incinerating loans with a flamethrower. And just the year before, KFC did this.
If you name your baby Harlan, you could win $11,000 in college tuition, all part of a contest by KFC to honor its founder, Colonel Harlan Sanders. The chain will give the prize to the first baby born on September 9th, named Harlan. September 9th was the Colonel's birthday, and the $11,000 is a nod to his chickens. 11 herbs and spices.
OK, first, that laugh is delightful, but also, someone actually did that. They named their baby Harland for $11,000 in college tuition money, which is dark, but to be fair, Harland's not the worst baby name. The worst name would be Derek. Think about it. You saw a baby with cheeks like clouds and an innocence unparalleled, and you thought, that's Derek. That's my little second-string lacrosse player. I can't wait to hold that junior sales associate in my arms. But as wild as those offers are, you can see the appeal. Currently, over 43 million Americans have student loans. That's about 13% of the US population, for a total outstanding debt of $1.7 trillion. That's higher than the GDP of Australia, one of the countries you know. Sometimes, to illustrate a point, I have to use a country like Estonia, and you have to infer from my tone whether that means a number is big or not. But now, because I've successfully traumatised you over the years, you're probably wondering, is that really Estonia? I don't know. You tell me. Maybe you should have paid more attention at that school that you paid so much fucking money for. And for many struggling to pay their student loans, the debt can feel overwhelming.
I started with $80,000. I have been paying for 10 years. The grand total is I have paid $120,000 and I still owe $76. How the fuck is this possible?
That is the appropriate response. No one should be working for 10 years only to end up worse off than when they started. I mean, physically worse, sure, that's a given. It's completely understandable, but not financially. Now, you might remember Joe Biden campaigned on tackling student debt, but his most ambitious plan to wipe out over $400 billion of it was struck down by the Supreme Court last summer. Another banger decision from the Gavel Gang, who are really playing the hits these days. Honestly, you guys should probably take this show on the road, and if you do, I've actually got the perfect tour bus. For another 48 hours, it can be yours. Well, one of yours, if the rest of you get invited, is kind of up to him. And for many on the right, the court's decision was a good thing, because all along, the very idea of student loans getting forgiven had made them furious.
He may pull the trigger tomorrow on even more student loan forgiveness for pointless, useless, baloney liberal arts degrees like the cultural significance of soap operas.
Why stop at student loans? Why not pay off people's car loans, their home loans, their loans to get a tattoo?
Why should I have to pay for my neighbor's dumb daughter who went to, I don't know, grad school for anthropology, who just backed her car into my car and didn't leave a note? I'm not paying for that.
Wow. What a bunch of weird, made-up bullshit followed by one thing that definitely did happen. I'll be honest, I'd never considered how that cufflink of a man has neighbours. He lives in a community. Among people who have to see him on the street and at the store, and yet he thinks someone hit his car by mistake? And that there's only one suspect? That's absurd. The whole town probably takes turns driving into his car. Also, for the record, Jesse Waters went to a private liberal arts college in Connecticut, which really shouldn't be surprising. That is the most Connecticut bitch face I've ever seen. Season 5 Rory Gilmore would have wrecked her whole life for him. But for all the scorn heaped on people who took on student debt, it's worth noting that this number only got so big because of a lot of short-sighted policy choices over the years. In fact, one of the original architects of the federal loan programme back in the 60s was asked a few years ago how she thought her proposal turned out, and she said, quote, "We unleashed a monster." So given that, tonight, let's look at that monster, how it got so big and what we can do about it. And let's start with how we got here, because there's two key issues that got us into this mess. The first is the loan programme itself. Federal money for higher education really started with the introduction of the GI Bill. For years after it, lawmakers argued unsuccessfully for more federal funding for education. Then Sputnik happened, and suddenly everyone from Eisenhower on down decided that scientific education was key to keeping up with Russia. Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act, which created the first loan program for students who wanted to study math, science and engineering. And over the years, one president after another expanded the program. LBJ opened up lending to more people regardless of their area of study. Nixon launched Pell Grants and created Sallie Mae. And Clinton started the process of shifting away from banks issuing student loans to having them come directly from the government, all while pushing repayment ideas like this.
The Democrats ought to be for a program that gives every American person the chance to go to college and help for everybody who needs it, and they should pay the money back in one of two ways. Either as a small percentage of their income over a long period of time, or by giving 3 or 4 years of their lives back to their country through national service as teachers, or policemen, or family service workers.
Sounds pretty good. In exchange for an education, graduates could give back by doing 2 of the hardest jobs I can imagine, and one that's mostly staring at your phone in the New York subway. Under Clinton and later Bush, we actually passed versions of that proposal, pegging student loan repayment to income or national service. And some of these tweaks genuinely had the goal of making access to education easier. But the only thing they definitely made easier was ensuring that anyone going to college could now access an absolutely massive line of credit. And theoretically, that would have been manageable, so long as the price of college didn't get out of hand. But that brings us to this second issue, because up until the pandemic, which brought tuition freezes, the price of an education crept up steadily over the years. It's now at the point where the average net cost of attendance for in-state students at public schools, that is after subtracting financial aid and grants and adding in costs for things like housing, food and books, is around $20,000 per year. And while a lot of factors contributed to that rise, one key one was a dynamic that accelerated after the 2008 financial crisis, when states began slashing funding for public colleges and universities, where the vast majority of US students go. Now, understandably, those declines in funding were followed by large increases in tuition and fees to cover the gap. Here was the former head of LSU in 2016 explaining how in just a few short years, the ratio of what the government pays to what students pay had shifted there.
I'd say in 08 we were 70-30, 70% state, 30% student. We're 80-20 right now. 80% student, 20% state. We're quietly privatizing public higher education throughout the country. The children in elementary school are not going to have a public, affordable option by the time they get out of high school.
It's true. And you can frankly add that to the list of things that elementary school children aren't going to have by the time they're 18. The list is now affordable public college, summers below 100 degrees, and their grandparents probably. Sorry, kids, olds die.
Well,
and when that reporter asked the then governor of Louisiana to justify those cuts, his response
obviously
was
have
less
like
than
the
inspiring.
YouTube video running.
I have a constitutional obligation to
just
deliver
do
a
the
balanced
average
budget.
thing that I
and the
usually
cuts
do.
have to come from somewhere. So the cuts are coming at the expense of higher
add a
education
little
and also at the
extra on
expense
top,
of students
and I'm just
in
gonna
order to
delete the
keep
whole
those
line, it doesn't
universities
matter.
afloat.
Students have access to money. So do lawmakers think, well, we won't put money toward this because we know that students can take out debt and pay for their education that way?
Well, obviously, that is happening to some degree, not just in Louisiana, but around the country, and I find it very troubling.
Yeah, we're robbing our children to pay for our budget. On one hand, I guess he's being honest there, but that is still one of the worst things I've ever seen come out of Louisiana. With the best, of course, being Monsieur Jacques, the statue of a frog in a top hat from the City of Rain. Now, does it look like the placard in front of him is blocking his enormous frog dick? Yes. Yes, it does. Is there a photo where it doesn't look like that? No, my friends, there is not. So, public universities were struggling for funding, and many responded by ramping up spending, which might seem counterintuitive until you realise that you can charge tuition almost 3 times higher to out-of-state or international students than in-state ones. So colleges now compete to lure those students in with expensive amenities from state-of-the-art student centres to rock climbing walls. In fact, one of the most potent symbols of those spending wars is actually at LSU itself.
Wow, there it is. Lifeguards and everything.
Students at Louisiana State University can now enjoy a 500-foot lazy river that spells out LSU.
Hey, lifeguard, are you a student here too?
Yes, sir.
So you're paying for this? You're paying for the lazy river?
Yes, I pay for this. It's in my fees.
OK, first, stop yelling at that student through a fence. He's busy at work being paid to watch the river he paradoxically funds. Second, not to river shame, but that has too many curves. The whole point of a lazy river is to get day drunk on natties, pass out to an MGMT album and vibe. You can't do that if every 5 seconds you have to navigate the twists and turns of the letter S. But whether out of necessity or greed, universities basically started turning their campuses into resorts to justify taking more money from students. And the thing is, even as tuition climbed, students didn't stop applying. They just kept borrowing as much as they could. So the mere existence of the student loan industry has ended up contributing to a vicious cycle of rising tuition and higher debt loads, all of which has made it very easy to wind up taking on debilitating amounts of debt, often at an age where you barely understand what you're getting into.
It was just explained to us as everybody has student loans, and this is just something you do to get ahead in life. To have a drink of alcohol, you have to be 21. To take out $100,000 worth of debt, you can be 18. You can do that. And I definitely did not understand what I was signing up for.
Right, that's a huge burden to take on at 18, and that's already a difficult age. You can't legally drink, you can't stop fighting with your mom, who's being a total bitch, and Leonardo DiCaprio keeps skulking around your school. Why add the biggest financial decision of your life to that list? One borrower said she barely recognised her own childlike handwriting on the forms that committed her to decades of debt.
Like,
And
I
yet,
have
for many,
the
taking it on
crease.
can seem like the only rational
try it
choice
again.
because so many careers are
Is
off
this
limits
like
to
a-
anyone who hasn't been to
Yeah,
college.
what the fuck is
Even though 2/3 of administrative assistants don't have
I
bachelor's
think it's
degrees,
because I'm
3/4 of the new
clicking
job
on the
postings
wall
for
because of the way
administrative
my
assistants
camera's
say you have to
right?
have a
I
bachelor's
think that's the
degree to
real.
be considered for that job. So 2/3 of the people who currently do that job can't apply for 3/4 of the new jobs in the field.
Exactly. A lack of a college degree is a significant barrier to entry for a lot of jobs. And barriers to entry make sense for some things like practicing medicine or gorilla enclosures. But requiring a degree for a job that can be done without one makes no sense at all. And once you've taken these loans on, even those who can afford the minimum payment can end up treading water for years. Here's that woman you just saw, breaking down where her monthly payments actually
Try it
go.
again.
So my total due for this month, $707.74.
I think there's
What will be
sticky
applied to the
targeting.
principal?
I can't
$64.54.
detarget.
So the principal is the total amount of loan, like actual money that I actually took out.
Oh, why am I doing it?
What will be going to the interest?
Before I fix everything.
$643.20. So my principal isn't going down. My debt isn't going down. I'm literally just paying the interest.
I suck.
That is ridiculous. That $650 could clearly be much better spent on the principal on her loan or even to buy 2 cameos from Rudy Giuliani every month. And I would prove that to you by buying one, but I do not want to give that man any money. So we got one from Snooki instead, who charges around the same amount.
Hey Brittany, what's up mama? It's your girl Snooki, and I cannot believe this video costs half as much as your student loan interest. That's fucked up. Mwah.
There it is. Thank you, Snooki. Thank you very much. And as those debts pile up, it is no wonder that for many with student loans,
I need
it
to
can feel
fix
almost impossible to
so
plan
many
for a
things I have to
future.
fix.
One of
I
the
did
things that
reset
scares
the
me
UI
is
because I'm a
becoming a
dumbass.
parent.
I'm
I
so
just got
fucking
married
stupid.
last
Holy
year.
shit.
And my wife is on me like, hey, you know, I'm ready. Are you ready?
they
And
disc
so,
roll? Oh, they got the
you know, I would love to be a parent, but then I look at the cost of childcare and I look at my student loan balance and it's like, then I'm still going to be balancing. Do I make my student loan payment or do I pay childcare? You know, and I don't want to default on my student loans, but at the same time, if I'm going to become a parent, I want to make sure that my child has the best life possible. And I just don't see how that's possible with having a student loan debt hanging over my head.
Yeah, student loans shouldn't determine whether you have kids. It'd be crazy if something the government did influenced your decision to have a child or not, right? Right? That would be crazy, right? It would be absolutely crazy. And let's address who gets hit hardest here, because when many imagine the typical borrower, they are picturing the caricature painted on Fox News, or in ads like this one attacking Biden's debt relief plan.
Want to be a struggling artist? College is on me.
My kids don't need fancy things like school supplies or new shoes.
I work for you, theater major.
This shift is for you, business major. Go buy yourself that new car.
Enjoy your free ride. College is on me.
Tell Congress, stop Biden's bailout for rich kids.
They're so right. Stop paying for rich kids to study theatre. What are they going to do with that degree anyway? Star in a hack political ad making fun of anyone who studies theatre? Go get a real job where you touch a wrench. But about that bailout for rich kids idea, it gets tossed around a lot when it comes to debt forgiveness, which is a little weird because rich kids tend not to have student debt because their parents tend to pay for their college, just like they tend to pay for lawyers to make that thing with the car and the cyclist go away. And people with the highest loan balances are often current on their payments because they may have gotten advanced degrees that allowed them to earn more.
I mean, I
Conversely,
got him killed.
those most burdened by debt often have relatively small amounts of loans. That guy was talking about putting off having kids. He's not in debt because he studied theatre. He owes $30,000 from going to a state university to study accounting. He took the exact path people like this guy love to cream their chinos over, and it still fucked him over. In fact, as of 2022, most student loan borrowers with outstanding debt owed less than $25,000. And having a smaller debt doesn't necessarily mean it's easier to pay off. In fact, borrowers with the least debt often had slightly more difficulty with repayments, and that can be for multiple reasons, including that they may have had to leave school
there is a
before
better way
finishing, meaning
for
they have all the
this
debt,
priest to be able to
but
heal
no
without
degree to show for it.
attacking,
And it gets
but I don't
even
know.
worse because
I could be
increasingly
wrong.
it's not just young people taking on
Yeah, I
student
could be
loans. That is
wrong.
thanks to yet another
'Cause
federal
you do get
program
most of
called
the damage from
Parent Plus,
atonement.
which allows parents to
Right.
take out a student loan
definitely getting most
on
of
their
the
child's
damage or
behalf. But
healing
these
from
loans are
atonement.
even riskier. They have effectively no income requirements and no limit on borrowing. And that means there are increasing numbers of retirees saddled with student debt on behalf of their kids, like this 80-year-old man.
This is my son. He graduated in 2008 from Bridgewater College with a degree in biology. I didn't want him to be stuck with having the debt that a lot of kids have when they get out of college, so I assumed that loan. The Parent Plus loan that I took out was through the Department of Education. But I think I started in 2004. I'm still paying it, and according to Navient, I'll be
And
done
the damage
in
is pretty low.
2040.
You know what I kind of like about that? The slight laugh in his voice at the end there. That is the chuckle of a man who knows he'll be dead long before that loan gets paid back. That is a man laughing in the face of God and government. And death might actually be the only option to get out from under these loans because, as we've discussed before on this show, student loans are extremely difficult to discharge through bankruptcy. They're actually something of an outlier in that regard, as this professor explains.
If I were to go and lose all my money at the gambling casino, I can declare bankruptcy. If I were to, be a criminal and do some horrible thing, I can declare bankruptcy. Students are not allowed to declare bankruptcy.
That is true. And while I appreciate the hypothetical there, it is a little hard to imagine this guy blowing his life savings at a craps table. I'm just saying, the very fact that he called it a gambling casino proves he has never been inside one. So this entire system seems practically set up to drown people in debt. But there is one more player that we should mention here, and that is student loan services. You might know them by names like these. And if you know who these companies are, you probably fucking hate them. Services like these manage loans on the government's behalf, and in theory, they're supposed to help you navigate the system, but in practice, they often manage to make things much worse. A report found some companies have billed people for the wrong amount, given them bad information, and subjected them to incredibly long hold times on the phone, with one borrower waiting 565 minutes to speak to a representative. And that incompetence is a real problem, because the government does have programs to ease the burden of student debt. Remember the ones that you saw Bill Clinton describe earlier, where your debt can be reduced based on income or public service? Those actually do exist. But unfortunately, the government designed them in a very complicated way, and their implementation is in the hands of these companies. Take this woman. She was enrolled in a program where, after a decade of public service, her loans would be forgiven. She spent her decade serving in the military, and 9 years in, having auto-paid on time every month, she assumed she was nearly done. But when she called her servicer, FedLoan, they told her that she'd only been credited with 1 year of payments, so still had 9 left. And when she asked why, their response
I had to
was
fix my whole UI,
maddening.
man.
The woman looked through my account. She says, you may have an issue that we know is an issue where the auto debit takes the payment, but 1 penny short of what is actually due, so it doesn't count. I submitted my case for review, and it sat in review for 3 years. And in the interim, I was paying, because you're like, okay, well, they're reviewing it, they're doing something, but the review never, 3 years later, it was still under review.
Hold on. We may have undercharged you by 1 penny, so the payment doesn't count? In no other transaction would that be acceptable. If you buy a shirt that's $9.99 and the store only charges you $9.98, the cashier can either let it go or say, you actually still owe us 1 penny, but at no point would they be allowed to say, sorry, your payment doesn't count, give us $10 again. And she's not alone. A GAO report found that loan forgiveness program had a denial rate of 99%. A similar thing happened with income-driven repayment plans, which provided that if your income was below a certain level and you made 20 to 25 years' worth of payments, your loan would eventually be forgiven, which sounds good. But again, the program's mechanics were very complicated, and servicers fucked things up. Government reviews found that some steered borrowers into something called forbearance instead, which basically hits pause on your loan but allows interest to keep accumulating. That is exactly what this
literally
woman says happened
trying
to
to
her.
see if my computer's gonna crash or
now,
not.
Julie
so
Alicia has
I'm
been
not
desperately
really
trying to take
like, I
control
literally have a
over
YouTube
mounting
video on
student
with the
loan
audio
debt.
on.
It's now in the
Like, I'm not even
tens of
trying to hide it.
thousands.
And it's crazy because I'm trying to pay.
But she says her loan servicer, Navient, is not helping. She's been trying to apply for an income-based payment plan, but instead the company steers her towards a costly forbearance.
Yeah, I need this
and won't
HP
send
to
the
show
paperwork
up.
she needs.
I requested
need-
income repayment program assistance, and I'm still waiting since like early summer last year.
That is absurd. She's actively trying to make this situation better, and they're not helping. She's taking it so seriously, she's wearing a headset on the news. Which I presume is because she's having to be on hold with Navient every waking moment of her fucking life. But even if you manage to get enrolled in a program and jump through all the hoops for 2 decades, your servicer still might screw it up. An investigation a few years ago found some servicers
It's something
weren't
to do
clearly
with your
tracking
mouth.
borrowers' payments toward the
It's
program
something to do
and
with your
had
mouth.
no
I don't know
idea
where you
when
would
borrowers
even find
qualified for forgiveness, which may help explain why, as of 2021, despite the fact that 2 million borrowers have been enrolled in income-based repayment plans for over 20 years, only 32 had successfully cancelled their loans. Not 32%, 32 people. This program has only worked for a single season of Bachelor contestants. And honestly, chalking it up to companies' incompetence might be too generous here. A whistleblower who worked in customer service at Navient has said that one major metric employees were graded on wasn't how helpful they could be to customers, but how fast they could get them off the phone.
Part of our training was keeping your calls to 7 minutes. If I don't keep my call to 7 minutes, I have a lower status at the end of the day.
This
I'm
Greece is
considered
so
not
stupid,
having
dude.
performed as
Why
well.
even
A
try and
few of my
heal through this shit
coworkers
with your
said
disc?
that there was
Dispel
just
it.
no way to answer all of those questions in a way that was satisfactory and maintain the numbers that we were maintaining. And
man.
so they would be on their
That's
call
crazy.
and then they would just press a button and go, oops.
Yeah, the audio of the
Wow.
video should be way higher.
Oops. That is not good. And I should say, Navient denies putting time limits on calls and also denies steering customers into forbearance. In fact, they have a whole statement here that apparently I have to read to you, except, oops! Oh, I dropped it. It turns out you're right, Navient. It's so easy to do. Now, the good news is, Navient's contract with the government has since expired. Unfortunately, many of their accounts were transferred to Mohila, which doesn't seem to be much better. It was recently found to have failed to send billing statements on time to 2.5 million borrowers, and over 800,000 were delinquent on their loans as a result. And when you take everything you've seen tonight together,
it's two
it
marksman
is really
hunters.
hard to feel like this system isn't rigged.
Marksman hunters
you know,
aren't even
told
bad. They're just
working class
fucking
people that as long as you get an
bad.
education, then you will have
Like,
job
that
prospects.
rotation
You'll be
for
able
hunters
to
is
take
so
care of your
fucking
family.
easy than
You'll be able
not.
to
Am I
have a
stupid?
future.
Maybe I'm the
I
stupid
really used to blame myself a lot, and I used to feel a
okay,
lot of
yeah.
shame. And then I
Maybe
started
they
to
just
look
have
at
to
the
get the
policies,
I'm the
and I'm like, wait a second. Is it personal responsibility
fucking
or is it
pants
really
again.
bad policy? And I realized it's
Maybe it's
bad
because I'm
policy.
talking so much shit.
She's right. We've set
Shut
up
my
a
damn
system
mouth.
where we've created a barrier to entry for many jobs that can only be passed by
wouldn't
taking
be
on some of
that
the most
amazing,
debilitating loans with the least protections administered by some of the
send me a different
shittiest
channel.
companies on earth. And all of this is particularly acute for black borrowers, who are more likely to take out student loans and carry the largest average loan debt of all demographics. So, what do we do? Well, personally, I would argue that Congress needs to pass massive debt forgiveness, but I know that is a hard sell in that building, given that some of its members have sat in hearings on the student debt crisis and said shit like
Yeah, I have to be
this.
super careful.
I'm a small
with,
business owner back in
self-dealing
Texas, and in
because
my world,
if
if
I
you borrow the
accidentally
money,
mouse
you pay the
and
money back.
spam click like
Pure and
somebody.
simple.
That's an interesting point from a man whose eyebrows seem surprised to be on his actual face. But on one level, I do get that argument. It's just, it's a little hard to take coming from him, as at the start of the pandemic, his small business received a $1.4 million PPP loan, and guess what he didn't then do? Pay it back. He also happens to be one of the wealthiest members of Congress, so I think we may have just found an actual bailout for the rich here. Someone should tell that man who definitely knows how a car works. He's going to be so mad. And that is the thing here. For all the populist speechifying, that essentially boils down to how dare you spend money on something that benefits someone who is not me, the government spends money all the time on all sorts of things to benefit select individuals because we think there is a net societal benefit. From forgiving loans to small businesses, to subsidising corn farmers, to giving homeowners massive tax breaks, to building stadiums. I don't love spending money on all those things, but if you do, it feels pretty weird to suddenly draw a hard line at student debt. And while we wait for Congress to pass comprehensive debt relief, I do have some good news, because while the Supreme Court struck down Biden's big $400 billion plan, to his credit, he's managed to get other meaningful solutions through by tweaking existing programs. Under his administration, we've forgiven nearly $12 billion of debt for borrowers with disabilities, and through adjustments to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, another $56 billion for nearly 800,000 borrowers. That is significant for those benefiting from it.
Everything says paid in full. The relief and celebration came in a flurry.
I've been paying on student loans for 38 years.
Zero balance.
To see zero, I'm used to seeing zero on my checking account, not my student loans or a credit card or anything like that, so it's shocking.
That is great, and it's honestly the sort of thing that calls for a message of congratulations, and luckily, I happen to know just the person to deliver it.
Hey, Sarah, I'm so glad your student debt is all gone. Congratulations, Mama. Mwah.
Thank you again, Snooki.
I'm listening to,
And look, if you personally have student debt, it's worth knowing this administration is currently rolling out the SAVE plan, a retooled version of income-driven repayment, which does look promising.
I'm deleting them.
It lowers eligibility
I'm
requirements
testing
and
my
ensures
computer
that anyone
to
who borrowed
see
less
if,
than $12,000, their debts will be wiped clean after 10 years of payments. You can go to this website
computer
to see
has been
whether you're
shitting on
eligible
me
and how much
week,
it might
and
save
now I
you. And I'm
finally
not
have time
saying it's
to
perfect. For a start, it'll have to be administered properly, and remember, these arseholes are still involved. But in just its first few months, the SAVE plan has relieved a total of $1.2 billion for 150,000 borrowers. In fact, if you take everything Biden's administration has done together, he's managed to relieve $138 billion in student loans for 3.9 million people in just 3 years. That is more than any president in history. And look, I know we are talking about band-aid solutions here. Even if we got rid of all the problems with the surfaces, that won't address the giant pile of debt that people owe. And even if we got rid of that, that won't fix the central problem that the cost of college in this country is absurd. And there are proposals to deal with that, each with pros and cons, from putting colleges themselves on the hook for a portion of the debt when students default on their loans to making college tuition free. And I'm sure that we will discuss them at another time, because we do need to tackle the cost of college, and for everyone's good. And I'm not saying college is the right choice for everyone, but it should be a choice. It can unlock a lot of opportunities and be a net benefit to all of us. So it should be affordable for everyone, regardless of what you study. Whether you're a medical student, business student, or a certain anthropology student, heroically ramming into your dipshit neighbor's car. A grateful nation thanks you.
Yeah, that's definitely worth spell warding. That's a fuck ton of damage. Oh yeah, let's test that. Divine Heal does work. Good. Good to know. Oh well. Never lucky. Whoa, that's a crazy fucking necklace. Wait, why are we going through here? Am I stupid? Why do we go through here? Am I... What is? I wonder. Okay, so this is actually not even that bad, because in Mythic Plus, this could be a shit ton of percentage, but these mobs seem like a fucking disaster to fight, to be honest. So I don't really know. Truly a ghoul scenario in general. So
our main story tonight concerns the courts, the dignified palaces of justice, which during COVID brought us spectacular moments like this.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here, she's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live, I'm not a cat.
Perfect. You know a hearing's off to a shaky start when a lawyer has to clarify that he is, and I quote, not a cat. And I did not want him to uncat himself there. I wanted that man to spend the rest of the hearing as a photorealistic kitten looking like he just witnessed a double homicide. Specifically, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, which is set to have a monumental year.
It's literally like
the cases concerning the availability of mifepristone, or whether Trump's immune from prosecution for his role in January 6th. It's also considering a case centering on something called Chevron deference, which I know sounds like the title of a spy novel that you'd burn through in an airport. But it's a vitally important legal precedent that says that when there is ambiguity in the letter of a law,
fucking on my
courts should
tab
defer
targeting
to
too.
regulatory
That's the
agencies'
worst
expertise.
case
Very
scenario.
basically,
Like,
do you like it when the EPA regulates pollution or the FDA regulates drugs? Much of their ability to do that comes from Chevron deference. And if the court guts it, it'll be much easier for private industries to block government regulation. So this is going to be a huge year for a court that has seldom been more powerful, and yet respect for it has seldom been lower.
The court's public approval rating has dropped to a 50-year low, with just 18% expressing great confidence.
It's true, and it's hard to think of anything people have less confidence in right now, aside from maybe the window seats in Boeing planes. And there are understandable reasons for that, from the unpopular decision overturning Roe v. Wade to the fact that 1/3 of the court was appointed, sometimes under dubious circumstances, by a man who never won the popular vote. But the past year has also introduced us to a whole new reason to question the court's integrity, thanks to a steady drumbeat of stories like these.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is facing new allegations. He accepted luxurious vacations and gifts from wealthy individuals and didn't properly disclose them.
Politico reported Justice Neil Gorsuch sold property he owned to the head of a major law firm.
Justice Samuel Alito defended himself after he didn't report a luxury trip to Alaska and a private jet flight.
The report
Prop
details
Pound
that in
seems pretty
July
weak.
of that
Yeah.
year, they stayed at the King
ain't
Salmon
the
Lodge
best.
and were served multi-course meals of Alaskan king
There's
crab
definitely
legs or
better
Kobe
takes out
filet. They also enjoyed wine that cost $1,000 a bottle.
Now, Alito denies he did anything wrong there, and specifically said if there was wine, it was certainly not wine that costs $1,000, which I hope is true for multiple reasons, namely that wine should never cost $1,000 because wine is not that good a drink. I'm serious. Think about the words people use to describe good wine. Complex? That's just a fancy word for confusing. Earthy? That's literally dirt flavour. And smooth? Your best compliment is that it didn't fight you on the way down? It's a bad drink. But the cost of the wine, which again should be zero, isn't the point here. The fact is, stories like those have further undermined public trust in the court, which is a big problem. Because it's an institution that relies on respect. It can't enforce its own rulings. And without public buy-in, it could theoretically be ignored. Chief Justice Roberts himself recently wrote, public trust is essential, not incidental to our function. So these scandals are a huge issue for it. And given that tonight, we thought we'd look at how deep this court's problems go and a possible solution that might go 1/9 of the way towards helping things get better. And let's start with a striking fact, because when it comes to what ethical rules the court is required to follow, there basically aren't any. Congress can impeach a justice in extreme scenarios, but short of that, the court essentially regulates itself, and that has happened in the past. In the 60s, Justice Abe Fortas was involved in a number of scandals, including taking money to advise a businessman who wound up having a case before the court. But despite the fact that getting paid for outside work was legal, and that Fortas both returned the money and recused himself from the case, the mere appearance of impropriety caused lawmakers of both parties to call for his resignation, and he stepped down, saying that he was doing so for the good of the court. And just a few weeks later, the US Judicial Conference unveiled a new ethics policy for federal judges with just one tiny exception. See if you can spot it.
The United States Judicial Conference today issued a code of ethics which forbids all federal judges, except Supreme Court justices, from accepting fees, gifts, or compensation of any kind for off-bench activities.
Yeah, the Supreme Court justices were exempt. So that new rule solved every problem except for the one they just had. And there have been multiple tweaks to the Code of Ethics over the years, with the one constant being that the Supreme Court justices are not covered by it.
Okay.
And even laws that apply to them are basically unenforceable. The argument is that because they are the highest court in the land, there is no one they can answer to. Now, over the years, the justices have noted that they voluntarily follow certain rules. For instance, they're required to report any gifts worth more than $480. That is how we learned about Ruth Bader Ginsburg receiving a $4,500 opera costume, Ketanji Brown Jackson receiving a floral arrangement from Oprah worth $1,200, and Antonin Scalia receiving 2 firearms and $950 worth of dictionaries.
What is this? Is it because
which is
it's
slightly
the only thing
weirdly
that people are
phrased,
attacking?
because $950 worth of dictionaries could either mean
What
one
is that?
very luxurious dictionary or 120 regular
This is a
ones.
combat thing,
But
right?
while those gifts were disclosed, others haven't been. Scalia had a habit of not disclosing trips that other people paid for, and actually died while staying for free at the hunting lodge of a business executive whose company had recently had a case before the court. And I bet that executive was very glad that he got the ruling before that very fun-sounding visit. And as
So you don't have to match
seen,
anymore,
some
you can
justices
just
have run
fold
with
and
that precedent.
it'll do
Remember
it, like-
Alito's fishing trip? When it came to light, he said that he didn't think the rules required disclosing it, and attempted to justify the free private jet flight with a laughable argument.
Alito explaining that on that private jet flight, he was in what would otherwise have been an unoccupied seat.
Oh, come on! Alito is considered one of the sharpest conservative legal minds, and that's the best he's got? Of course, if you hadn't been in the seat, it would have been empty, Samuel. That's not so much a defense of your behavior as it is an explanation of how seats work. Also, it's a private jet. All the seats are otherwise unoccupied. They don't overbook them like it's the 505 Spirit Airlines flight from Myrtle Beach to Vegas. And that feels ethically dicey even before you learn that one of his hosts on that trip was a hedge fund manager whose companies have since had 10 cases before the court. And that's not a one-off. For years, Neil Gorsuch had been trying unsuccessfully to sell a 40-acre piece of property that he co-owned in Colorado. But coincidentally, just 9 days after he was confirmed, he managed to sell it.
If someone's trying to target
And while he did disclose that sale, he left the identity of the purchaser blank on the form, which isn't great, because it turned out to be the chief executive of one of the nation's biggest law firms, which has since been involved in at least 22 Supreme Court cases. And if you wonder what that weird sound is right now, I'm pretty sure it's the ghost of Abe Fortas going, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me?" But the biggest offender on the current court is unquestionably Clarence Thomas. If you are unfamiliar with his work, I truly envy you. But very quickly, he's an extreme originalist, known for adopting hard-right positions years before other justices come around to them, from overturning gun laws to undermining the Voting Rights Act. He's also questioned whether poor people have a right to a lawyer, saying the Constitution only guarantees you the right to hire a lawyer, not to have one provided for you. And he once said that black civil rights leaders bitch, 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 moan and moan, whine and whine. And sure, why can't the people fighting for basic equality just have the chill, good time vibes that we all associate with Clarence fucking Thomas? He's so fun to be around. Ask almost any woman who's ever worked for him. For years, there have been stories about Thomas accepting lavish gifts, but things escalated recently with a series of ProPublica investigations revealing Thomas's relationship with these 4 conservative billionaires.
The report says the 4 moguls collectively treated Thomas to 38 destination vacations, 26 private jet flights, plus an additional 8 by helicopter, a dozen VIP passes to professional and college sporting events, 2 stays at luxury resorts in Florida and Jamaica, and 1 standing invitation to an uber-exclusive golf club. The dollar value likely in the millions.
Just one of those vacations was a 9-day Indonesian super yacht voyage that, if he paid for it himself, could have exceeded over $500,000. And the way ProPublica tracked down some of those trips is pretty great, because the host of that Indonesian vacation and multiple others was Harlan Crow, a billionaire who's given millions to efforts to move the law and the judiciary to the right. Crow liked to give out commemorative polo shirts for the trips that he took people on. So ProPublica just started looking at the shirts Thomas was wearing in photos, which helped them uncover some of these trips. And look, journalism is a crapshoot. Sometimes you spend weeks hunting down leads, painstakingly building a timeline. Other times, your target posts a photo of himself on Facebook wearing a T-shirt that says Secret Undeclared Yacht Vacation 2003 and gives the whole game away. Those reporters also tracked down photos and cards that Thomas's wife Ginny sent to friends to commemorate their trips with fun captions like 5 couples ready for river rafting. The so-called took 4 lucky couples to the first Nebraska football misspelled game of the season. And this photo of a Trump administration attorney and his wife captured Mark and Tricia Paoletta sang a special tribute to Clarence they created. And every single one of those photos looks like it was on the mood board for Get Out. But wait, because I'm still not done. They also found this photorealistic painting that Harlan Crow commissioned of one of those vacations, featuring him, Thomas, Leonard Leo of the Conservative Federalist Society, and a statue of a Native American man seemingly praying for lightning to strike this exact spot. But if you're thinking that that is the worst piece of art that Harlan Crow owns, you are mistaken.
Published reports say Dallas tycoon Harlan Crow's controversial collection includes Hitler's notorious autobiography Mein Kampf, signed by Hitler, oil paintings by Hitler, and linen napkins embroidered with the Nazi swastika. The collection is housed at Crow's mansion in Dallas. I can't get over the collection of Nazi memorabilia, said one guest who saw the Nazi treasure trove. You sort of just gasp when you walk into the room.
Yeah, I bet you do. Because that is a bit of a red flag, specifically this red flag. Now, Crow says his controversial artefacts are part of a collection meant to preserve a part of our history and to understand how we all got here. And I'm guessing his guests ask that exact same question when they see his signed copy of Mein Kampf for the first time. How the fuck did I get here? Though bad news for Harlan about at least one of his Hitler paintings. An expert has since deemed it definitely not authentic, which I guess he probably should have seen coming, as it was signed A. Hitler and not The Hitler. Crow has also repeatedly flown Thomas out on his jet for trips to the Bohemian Grove, the California retreat for the rich and powerful, where he and the Koch brothers apparently developed a bond. Here is Thomas with one of them and Ken Burns for some fucking reason. Thomas has also incidentally attended Coke donor events at least twice, serving as a fundraising draw for an organisation that regularly brings cases before the court. Now, his excuse for not reporting any of this was that he sought guidance from my colleagues and others and was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close friends was not reportable. And while it is true the judicial guidelines have an exception for personal hospitality, experts will point out that means dinner at someone's house, not a 9-day all-expenses-paid yacht trip. A pretty good rule of thumb is, if it could be a prize on The Price is Right, it's not personal hospitality. And Thomas has received more than just hospitality anyway. In 2014, one of Harlan Crow's companies bought a string of properties in Savannah, including Thomas's childhood home, where his mother still lives. Crow also reportedly paid for 2 years of private school for Thomas's grandnephew, who apparently Thomas has raised as a son, and which, based on tuition rates at the time, amounted to roughly $100,000. Neither of those were disclosed at the time either, and it gets pretty hard to square the lavish vacations, the real estate, the tuition, with Thomas's insistence that he's an iconoclastic voice for the little guy. In appearances like this one from 2 years ago, where he thanked the people who'd shown up to support him during his 1991 confirmation hearing.
The regular people showed up, and it was always us against the elites. And that's the way it has been for the last 40-plus years I've been in public life. Us against the elites.
Oh, I get it. So the 38 destination vacations were just part of your us versus the elites plot, right? Lull them into a false sense of security, and then presumably on the 39th vacation, vive la révolution! I love it, what a plan! But that sounds like horseshit even before you see that this is how that talk started.
I'm sure you and all of us want to join thank Harlan Crow and his family for making this wonderful facility available to us. I know Harlan hates that, so I knew we had to do it.
That's why I wouldn't say it.
I knew we had to do it.
I like to keep that friendship.
Oh, I bet you would. I'm sure friendship is definitely the thing that you like the most about knowing Harlan Crow. Not the lavish yacht trips or the private jet flights. It's the simple human companionship of an aging Nazi napkin collector. But perhaps the item that perfectly sums up the distance between Thomas's regular guy persona and his high-end tastes is his motorhome. It is his prized possession. He even showed it off during his 60 Minutes interview.
One of his passions is this 40-foot-long motorhome that he and his wife use to explore the United States in their downtime.
You find this relaxing?
Oh, yeah. It's away from the sort of the meanness that you see in Washington. You get here with just the regular folks, and it's so pleasant.
I can see that. You know, people in Washington can be so mean, can't they? I've heard some even make decisions in landmark court cases that loosen gun regulations, limited affirmative action, and strip women of their constitutional right to an abortion. So I get the impulse to want to get out of town to avoid those fucking sociopaths. Thomas loves his motorhome so much, he could actually be a bit of a snob if asked inaccurately about it.
One of you enjoys traveling cross-country with your spouse in a 40-foot RV? Who's that?
Well, that's technically incorrect.
It's not an RV.
It is a motor coach.
Is that bigger than an RV?
Well, it could be, but it is a better vehicle than an RV. An RV is normally built on a light truck chassis. A motor coach is a tour bus. I mean, it's old, but it's really nice.
Honestly, if Thomas hadn't caused so much human misery, him liking big, comfy trucks that go vroom, vroom would be genuinely charming. Every man in his 70s has picked a vehicle that occupies way too much space in his brain and heart. Some like trains that go choo-choo. Some like boats that go glub-glub. And others love motor coaches based on a non-light truck chassis. And I'm not saying that these men love their vehicles more than their families. It's just, it's easier for them to say, I prefer O-scale trains, because historically that's what this country's finest model trains have been since the 1800s, than, I'm proud of you, son. But about that bus, it is apparently the Rolls-Royce of motor coaches, a custom Prevost Marathon, or as Thomas himself once put it, a condo on wheels. And if you're thinking, that's a pretty big purchase for a Supreme Court justice to be able to afford, about that.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been an RV evangelist for decades, traveling the country in a 40-foot luxury motor coach that he purchased in 1999 after borrowing more than $250,000 from a wealthy friend. But a new report from Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee alleges Thomas's friend forgave a substantial amount of that massive loan, and 9 years later, his friend forgave all the debt.
Well, that sounds like a sweet deal. Honestly, it's starting to feel like Thomas doesn't so much have friends as a collection of human ATMs. And his wealthy friends will say there is nothing to see here. They're just doing for Clarence what they would do for anyone else. Harlan Crow pulled that exact move.
In a statement, Harlan Crow, the Dallas real estate billionaire who picks up the tabs for the trips, says he and Thomas have been friends since 1996.
Whoa.
Writing, the hospitality we have extended to the Thomases over the years is no different from the hospitality we have extended to our many other dear friends.
OK, but it
That's
is different,
crazy.
though. Because while you may have been friends with Clarence Thomas for a long time, you didn't start being friends with him until 5 years after he was made a Supreme Court justice. In fact, each of his 4 major benefactors appears to have first met Thomas after he ascended to the Supreme Court, which is inherently telling. Even socially adept high schoolers can figure that out. If Brenner, Jackson and Ashton only start hanging out with you after you get a job at Coldstone, it's not about you, it's about the free fucking scoops. And thankfully, there is a way for a justice to avoid the appearance of impropriety, and that is recusal. Any justice is required to disqualify themselves in any proceeding where their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. But, as with everything else you've seen tonight, for the Supreme Court, it's essentially just a suggestion. The justices themselves decide if they are able to be impartial, and those decisions cannot then be appealed. And even when it comes to recusals, Thomas is an outlier. He almost never recuses, even when he clearly should. Take one recent case where he had a flagrant conflict of interest, albeit not a financial one. Because the court recently took up a number of appeals involving cases surrounding January 6th. And as it happens, a major cheerleader to overturn Biden's win was Thomas's own wife, Ginny, as her text to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows show.
In one, Thomas writing, quote, "Help this great president stand firm, Mark. Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history." And in another, just days after the 2020 election, Thomas writing, "Do not concede."
On November 24th, Meadows wrote Thomas, "This is a fight of good versus evil." Thomas replied, "Thank you. Needed that. This plus a conversation with my best friend just now."
Wow. I will say, Ginny Thomas looks exactly like a person who would try to speak to the manager about a presidential election. But despite that conversation with my best friend line, Ginny insists that she never talked to her husband about the election challenges, which is a bit weird, because he says this a lot.
It's a particular honor to be here with my wife, Virginia, who's totally my best friend in the world. Love to spend time with my wife, who's totally my best friend in the whole world. I love being here with my bride, Virginia, who's a gift from God.
Why are you
and my
up at
totally
7
best
o'clock?
friend in the whole world.
OK, first, if Ginny is indeed a gift from God, I guess it's nice that Clarence Thomas got at least one gift from someone who is not a billionaire. But also, it would seem that either Ginny Thomas was keeping her husband up to date on her ongoing coup attempt, or she's Clarence's best friend, but he isn't hers. And that is rough. There's going to be a lot of awkward silences on their next motor coach trip. But the fact is, a justice's wife inserted herself into efforts to overturn the last election, yet in multiple cases involving January 6th, Thomas didn't recuse himself.
My computer's
even
been
in one
restarting
concerning whether
and
White House files, which could have
for
contained
the whole
more of
week,
Ginny's
and
texts,
so-
had to be handed over to the January 6th committee.
I just need to
in that
see
case, Thomas
this
was the
test
lone dissenter, saying that
to
they
see
should
if
remain
it's
secret. And if that is not a conflict of interest,
hardware
I honestly don't know
problem
what one
or something
is.
was loose in my
But look,
computer
the
or something,
fundamental corruption here might be bigger than anything one recusal could cover. Because I'm not saying that Thomas is only voting the way he is because of the trips and the gifts. His opinions were horrible before he ever set foot on a yacht. But that doesn't mean those billionaires haven't had a real impact on him. Because for years, Thomas repeatedly talked about money. In the 1980s, he told a reporter he planned to be rich and said that that means more than just a few $100,000 a year. But unfortunately for him, that's exactly what being a Supreme Court justice currently pays, just under $300,000. And he's been pretty vocal about his dissatisfaction with that, sometimes even publicly.
The job is not worth doing for what they pay. It's not worth doing for the grief, but it is worth doing for the principle.
You sure about that? Because your job is writing opinions in a bathrobe and it pays 6 figures. Most bloggers do that for free and they don't get to enjoy seeing their worst takes become everyone else's law. It was right around that time in the early aughts that Thomas reportedly said to a Republican member of Congress that unless it gave Supreme Court justices a pay raise, quote, one or more will leave soon, maybe in the next year. That set off alarm bells in conservative quarters. As that lawmaker Thomas spoke to recalls it, his importance as a conservative was paramount. We wanted to make sure he felt comfortable in his job and he was being paid properly. Unfortunately for Thomas, justices' salaries haven't been raised beyond inflation since then. But it may not be a coincidence that a handful of billionaires have suddenly stepped in to make sure that Thomas was never anything less than extremely comfortable. And in recent years, he seemed much less worried about his paycheck.
Right now, what is the compensation of a justice of the Supreme Court?
Oh, goodness, I think it's plenty.
Well,
he's gonna get hit.
It's not quite where you are, but it's. I have no.
I swear to God,
my
when
wife
people
and I are
play
doing
this game,
fine.
I don't really know what's happening.
We don't live
how they
extravagantly,
play it.
but we are fine.
But I guess, like, looking...
Here's a fun fact for you. That was in early June of 2019.
The mob's
Guess where he
looking at
was
you or
at the
not?
end of that month?
It's
on Harlan
probably
Crow's Indonesian yacht
like
trip.
a really old
That is the
thing,
comfortable laugh of a man
it?
looking forward to a free trip
Feel
and,
like
fingers
that's
crossed,
the
a free shirt to go with it. Basically, what I'm suggesting is it's not that these billionaires have paid Thomas to change his views. It's that they like his views, so they're paying for him not to leave. Which is different.
I have to delete this
but
VOD
not
anyways
better.
because I'm listening to
And if that
YouTube
was their
videos
plan, it
that I
has
wanted to listen
worked.
to for a while,
Because Thomas is now at the heart of the new Conservative supermajority on
But,
and has plans to go further. In his
I'm just
concurrence
testing
in
my
the Dobbs
computer.
case, he said the court should
I haven't
reconsider
crashed.
previous erroneous rulings on sodomy,
I think
birth
it's-
control, and gay marriage.
I think it's
And
because
despite
my
being known for the
graphics card
consistency
gets
of
too
his
hot.
views, there is one key issue on which he's
So I
evolved.
think I
because
need to buy
remember that Chevron
more
deference
fans.
that I mentioned earlier? 20 years ago, Thomas
And I can
actually
do
wrote a
that.
majority
This
opinion that
motherboard is,
expanded
like, really
Chevron's
good.
protections. But since then, there's been a massive conservative push to get rid of Chevron, led by the Koch organisation. You know, Clarence's vacation friends. And a few years ago, Thomas renounced his earlier decision, writing that he determined that the doctrine is actually unconstitutional after all. Now, what caused that change of heart? I don't know. Was it 15 years of marinating in right-wing money and vacationing with businessmen who could massively profit from it being overturned? We can't say for sure. But we can all think it together, can't we? Ready? Let's do that. 1, 2, 3. Yes, it's because of the money. Oh, shit, sorry. I thought it so hard it came out of my mouth. And look, I know we focused a lot on Clarence Thomas tonight, but this story isn't just about his integrity. It's about the courts. From the beginning, America, like most countries, was built on polite fictions by men who could somehow hold in their heads the idea that all men were created equal at the exact same time that they were drawing up the 3/5 compromise. And while we've shed a lot of those fictions, we still cling to the idea of the Supreme Court as a body separate and apart from politics. It retains a certain amount of mystique and ceremony. We literally put the justices on a pedestal and let them wear robes like wizards. In their confirmation hearings, they pretend to have no idea how they'll rule on hot-button issues, and we all have to pretend to believe them before we appoint them to a job that they can hold until they die. We don't treat them like what they are, which is people who can be motivated by ideology and greed like anybody else. But polite fictions can only be bent so far before they break. And right now, it feels like the Supreme Court is at a breaking point. And there are small ways to fix that, from a real enforceable ethics code to term limits to even potentially expanding the court. And honestly, if it were up to me, they'd also be dressed not in robes, but as Walmart greeters, to emphasise they're not magic, they're humans like everyone else. But if we're not going to do any of that, if we're going to keep the bar of accountability this low, perhaps it's time to exploit that low bar, the same way billionaires have successfully done for decades. And that finally brings us to the solution that I mentioned at the start of this piece, because Clarence Thomas is arguably the most consequential justice on the court right now. And he's never really seemed to like the job. He said it's not worth doing for the grief. So what if he could keep the luxury perks that he clearly enjoys without having to endure all of that grief? Well, I think there might actually be a way to do that, because Justice Thomas, we have a special offer for you tonight. We are prepared to offer you $1 million a year for the rest of your life if you simply agree to leave the Supreme Court immediately and never come back. It is that simple. Just sign this contract, resign, and the money is all yours. This is not a joke. If you watch our show, you know jokes aren't really our thing. This is real. $1 million a year until you or I die. We have spoken to experts who've all told us that best they can tell, this is somehow legal, which seems crazy to me because it really feels like it shouldn't be. But as they keep pointing out, there are no rules in place to stop me from doing this. And let me be clear, HBO is not putting up the money for this. I am personally on the hook. You can make me really regret this. I could be doing stand-up tours to pay for your retirement for years, but this offer is not forever. You have exactly 30 days from midnight tonight to make your resignation effective. And if you are still on the fence, I actually have a little deal sweetener that I'm excited to show you. So please, come with me. Just come this way. Because we know you've got a lot on your plate right now, from stripping away women's rights to hearing January 6th cases you definitely shouldn't be hearing, to potentially helping roll back decades of federal regulations. And you deserve a break, you know, away from the meanness of Washington, so you can be surrounded by the regular folks whose lives you've made demonstrably worse for decades now. And the good news is, I think we can help you there, because since your favourite mode of travel might be in need of an upgrade, we are excited to offer you this brand new, top-of-the-line Prevost Marathon motor coach. Look at this beauty, Clarence. It's worth $2.4 million, and it's got a full bedroom. Yes, that is a king bed. 1.5 baths, a fucking fireplace, 4 TVs, a washer-dryer, and I quote, a residential-sized fridge. And if you're thinking, what will my friends say if I take this offer? Will they judge me as they sit in their boardrooms and mega yachts and Hitler shrines? Will they still treat me to luxury vacations and sing songs about me off their phones? Well, that's the beauty of friendship, Clarence. If they're real friends, they'll love you no matter what your job is. So I guess this might be the perfect way to find out who your real friends actually are. So that's the offer. $1 million a year, Clarence, and a brand new condo on wheels. And all you have to do in return is sign the contract and get the fuck off the Supreme Court. Talk it over with your totally best friend in the whole world. Because the clock starts now. 30 days, Clarence. Let's do this. That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night. How is this legal? Your move, Clarence. Your fucking move.
Yeah, there's a reason why I'm not pulling more. Especially if we don't have anybody that can do all the respawn points too. What do you need to do? Oh, to do all the Night Fae things? You have to be a Tauren Night Elf, an Herbalist, and some other shit. I can't really think of it off the top of my head, honestly. There's some other things too, but I can't think of it. There's other races. I don't think it's troll, but there's something that's like Night Fae related you could do. I don't know.
Our main story tonight concerns
Yeah,
the
I'm
internet.
deleting
It can be a
Spawn.
magical place,
I'll
but
never
also
see
one
me
where
stream
things
at
aren't
this
always
hour
what they
again.
seem, as this woman learned the hard way.
Queen Shadonna Hainsworth thought
I
she
woke up
bought
early to
this,
fucking
the
test this
Instagram
shit.
ad displaying a tree that fits in a living room, not the palm of her hand.
Like, seriously?
I'm so shit. I need Divine Toll, dude. It's a crutch.
Yeah, it must have been pretty disappointing to order a full-size tree and get whatever that is. She must have felt like HBO did when they ordered a comedy show and got this instead. Unfortunately, not every mistake is that benign. It is not news that there are scammers on the internet, but you may have noticed that one scam in particular is currently everywhere. A common way that it starts is with a weird text from a number that you don't recognise, like, Cheryl, can we move lunch to 5 when you're not Cheryl? Or, Dave, what time is our flight when you're not Dave and you don't have a flight booked? Even as we worked on this piece, multiple members of our staff and their friends were getting these messages from, hello, is this the manager Jessie from the flower shop? To this one reading, is this Dr. John? I'm Emily. Is my horse recovering well? And I'm so glad that wasn't sent to me, because it would have worked. You're calling me Dr. John? I'm instantly on board. And you're assuming that I'm around a horse for medical reasons? That's exactly what I've been saying. I'm allowed to touch it like that. I'm a doctor. And I know most people ignore messages like those, but some write back, get sucked into a conversation, and eventually, through a process that we'll get into, can end up losing a lot of money. It's a scam with a striking name that newscasters can't seem to get over.
It's called a pig butchering scam, and it might sound like a gruesome name, but that's because the amount of money victims are losing is painful.
The scammers have a terrible term
Oh.
for what Wendy went through. They call it pig butchering.
That's
the
the
New Mexico
that's the new
Securities
ability.
Division calls
Everything
them
else is basically
pig
the same.
butchering scams.
Oh, I guess
know,
also
but
Mind
listen,
Link
don't
only
worry.
targets
There are no
tanks,
pigs or any other animals involved.
but that's
Yes,
like not
don't worry, there are no pigs harmed in this pig butchering scam, although if the words do make you squeamish, it's worth noting that there is a process through which pigs are harmed every day. It's actually how we get bacon, pork, and other products. It's called pig butchering, and it's exactly what it sounds like. But the name makes a little more sense once you understand how the scam actually works.
In the world of cyber and counterterrorism threats, Special Agent Hassani has seen it all. But in 2021, he began seeing a new scam, pig butchering.
But it just refers to raising little piglets, fattening them up, and
butchering them. And they're fattening up their victim with illusions of grandeur, of wealth, of love, before bleeding them dry.
That is rough, because imagine being a victim of this scam, turning on the news and suddenly learning that the short handful of people in your situation is the pigs. Although I will say it could have been worse. Pigs are awesome. They're one of the most intelligent animals on the planet. They're smarter than dogs, most 3-year-olds, and Tom Sandoval. To use a phrase that the police never seem to appreciate, it's actually an honour to be compared to a pig. And if you are thinking, well, this seems like the kind of scam that's been around for decades, that is partially true. But the way this one works is fairly new, and in the short time that it's been around, it's been massively successful. Just this month, it was at the centre of a huge local news story in Kansas where it brought down a financial institution.
I was surprised. I
Cool.
was shocked. I was
I
disappointed.
got the
Kansas State Bank
shield.
Commissioner David Herndon is talking about the massive cryptocurrency scam at the Heartland Tri-State Bank in Elkhart.
In a cryptocurrency scheme that the FBI is now referred to as pig butchering.
In this case, Herndon says the victim was
still need
Sean
to run
Hayes,
this place for
the
this
bank's
dumbass
own
helmet.
CEO.
But now I
He's
need
now
these stone
facing
balls.
charges of embezzling nearly
I'm already
$50 million, a loss that caused the bank to fail last August.
That's true. According to prosecutors, a bank CEO got pig butchered, sent his scammer the bank's holdings, and the bank went under. Which is
long were
alarming
they
for several reasons.
streaming
Among them,
last time?
is that how banks work? Because it really feels like there should be at least one step between CEO gets tricked and whoops, the bank's empty. It's estimated that as of 2022, this scam was taking people for more than $3 billion a year in the US alone. And that's almost certainly a massive undercount, as it only includes people who reported their losses to the FBI. So given all of that, tonight, let's talk about pig butchering, why it's easier to fall for than you might think, who's behind it, and what we can do to protect ourselves and our liked ones from getting scammed in the future. And let's start with where this began. And to do that, unfortunately, we do need to go back to the place that no one wants to go, the beginning of COVID. You remember COVID? It's the Stephen Miller of diseases, in that we were all very worried about it a few years ago and have since moved on, even though it's still extremely dangerous. But that is when pig butchering took off. Basically, at the start of COVID, many of us were isolated and lonely, desperately looking for human contact online, which made us ripe targets. At the same time, organised crime groups in China running casinos in Southeast Asia were in crisis as, thanks to the pandemic, gamblers weren't showing up. So they turned those casinos into bases for online scam operations. And from there, their workers identified people and preyed on their vulnerabilities. And let me walk you through the basic steps here. The first is to make contact and lure your target in. Listen to this woman explain how her scammer, who called himself Jimmy, contacted her at a moment when she was dealing with cancer, the pandemic, and the end of her marriage.
First message, it came as a very innocent message. I said, wrong number. He came back, you look Chinese. Are you Chinese? And I said, yes. He had moved here just before COVID. And then COVID hit, and so he's not able to go home.
I don't actually know.
He was
I should catalyst this.
a lonely man in need of comfort. Jimmy would message me every day. I do remember receiving these emojis with hearts. It's quite flattering for a middle-aged woman to meet a young man who finds you attractive.
Yeah, of course that's flattering, because scammers are telling their targets what they want to hear most in that moment. We might not all fall for a gif of a heart-pumping emoji, but if someone sent me, nerd with glasses, plus football, plus learning, plus sad statistics equals fire emoji, me personally, why? I would nut. And look, one way of making contact is through those wrong number texts, but experts that we've talked to estimate that they only make up about a quarter of the initial contacts for this scam. The rest can come through sites like LinkedIn, dating apps, Instagram, or Facebook, places specifically designed for you to meet people that you don't know,
you're allowed to do
either for love, a hookup, or in the case of LinkedIn, to find out what kind of person is still on fucking LinkedIn. And scammers often research their target using social media, where there is a lot of information about people. So they can pretend to have something in common. Take this woman who met someone on a dating app, only to discover that they shared an unexpected connection.
He started asking questions about my family and my past experiences.
It was a connection that felt even stronger, she says, when he told her he came from the same town in China from where Hutchinson was adopted.
We kind of bonded over that.
Yeah, I bet they did. And I've got to say, it says something about men on dating apps that they connected so well simply because he did things like ask her questions about herself and listen to her responses. I don't want to say the bar for men is low, but that story started with him asking her questions about her life and ends with her giving him all of her money. But regardless of how they start, sooner or later we move on to step 2, turning the conversation toward money. But even then, there's a smart twist, because you won't be suddenly asked to wire money to a Nigerian prince with an obviously fake email like real prince spelled with a 1 instead of an I at scum.farts. With pig butchering, there's no direct ask for money at all. Instead, an opportunity gets presented to you. Just watch as this man explains the moment when a guy that he met on a dating site started to reel him in.
He spent at least a month daily.
I think what I will buy though is a new
cultivating my friendship.
Initially, the only talk about money was how much his new online friend had made in crypto. After all, Scott thought he knew how to protect himself from scams.
Yeah, you probably won't.
You can invest with me, and I'll make you all this money. And it's like, I'm not giving you money. That's not happening.
It's pretty old, I guess. It's like at least.
That's when he started. No, you don't give it to me.
I don't know how long
you establish your own account, and I'll guide you.
Right. That's the clever hook here. You're not sending the scammer money. They're helping you set up and control your own account. And everything seems more legitimate when there's an app involved. You don't think so? When is the last time you took an Uber? Oh, get in a nondescript car with someone I've never met? I would never do that. But wait, watch this. I can do it from my phone. Well, in that case, here's my address. Now you know where I live and that I won't be home for the evening. My name's John. I don't know your last name, but that doesn't matter because I'm also not committing your face to memory. Everything's safe. There's an app involved. And the fact the investment is often in crypto can be persuasive for multiple reasons. First, who really knows how crypto works? I know your friend's weird husband claims that he does, but he sucks to talk to, so sadly, it must remain a mystery. But people have made money on crypto, so it's not unreasonable to think you might meet one of them and they could give you some tips, on top of which you may not be super familiar with how a trading platform operates or even what one looks like. And scammers have created incredibly plausible-looking platforms. We got this footage of one which seems to have all the detail and functionality of a real one, and I'll be honest, I could be fooled by that. Also, some scammers use legitimate apps that allow anyone to build a trading exchange. The problem is there are tools that scammers can use to simulate fake results on those apps while taking your money. Just watch this journalist explain how this gave one victim false confidence.
In MetaTrader, it looks just like any kind of normal trading interface that one would use. That's available in the Google Play Store. It's available in the Apple App Store. It's an app that has a lot of good ratings. And that was one of the things that made Sai think that this whole operation was legitimate. He believed that his investment was making money. If you're trading on a legitimate trading interface, right, you see the profits and losses
if you don't take this sum
exactly
right now, even though it'll waste
if your
time,
friend told you to download an app and you saw it in the App Store with good reviews, you might assume that everything on it was legitimate. Even before you saw MetaTrader's logo, which looks like 3 men in suits jerking each other off under a table, an appropriate metaphor for cryptocurrency if I have ever seen one. Some scammers even set up additional features like 2-factor authentication or customer service lines. This woman tried her best to do due diligence on the site that she was sent and came away convinced that it was real.
There was a legal secretary involved in another state. She's vouching association with a law firm where it was sending money to. She's real. I could verify her. So it was very complex and well rehearsed.
Right, she spoke with a legal secretary and a law firm before sending money. And that is more vetting than I've done for my kids' daycare. Look, I love them and they're very precious to me, but they're also loud, sticky, and one of them is just getting stronger and stronger every day. So, if you have a building with walls and a phone number that I can call, I trust you, take them for the afternoon. And at this point in the process, things might look pretty good for the people getting scammed. You've sent a bit of money to a legitimate-looking site through an account that you control, and your new friend's trading tips seem to be working, so maybe you send a little bit more, and pretty soon, you might have a fair amount of money tied up on this trading platform.
I love assassination.
But when you eventually go to withdraw it, that is where we hit the final step of this process. Remember that woman you saw earlier whose online friend claimed that he was from the same town where she was born? Well, she convinced her dad to invest as well. They seemingly made a bunch of money, and then this happened.
Pretty sure that's what
By
my next
December,
character's
their
gonna do.
accounts showed a combined balance of $1.2 million, and Hutchinson decided it was time to cash out. That's when the site told her before she could withdraw her money, she'd have to pay a hefty tax bill of roughly $380,000.
That's when I was like, something's not right.
It wasn't. The cryptocurrency investments weren't real. All her and her father's funds had gone into the scammers' pockets. In all, $390,000 stolen.
I messed up my life. I messed up my dad's life.
She told me that it was all a scam.
Hutchinson's father, Melvin.
And all I could do was just hug her and tell her, it's okay. It's okay. And it was hard. It was hard because we lost everything.
Yeah, their money had already gone. And that tax bill was just an attempt to squeeze them one last time. And theirs isn't the only brutal story here. This woman lost $350,000. This guy lost $300,000. And that woman who fell for Jimmy sent him $2.5 million as she was dealing with terminal cancer. It is traumatic and it's humiliating, and it took courage for those people to come forward. And that is partly why experts think the $3 billion figure that we have is way too low, because most people who've been scammed like this simply don't report their losses out of embarrassment. And at this point, you're probably furious with the people on the other end of all of these messages and want to see them taken down or, at the very least, fucked with. And that does happen a lot. People post screen grabs messing with scammers all the time, like in this exchange where someone replies to wrong number text with, my name is Inigo Montoya, and you don't by any chance have 6 fingers on your right hand, do you? Or this one where a scammer writes, I'm Sarah, nice to meet you, with a picture, and gets the reply, wee woo, boner alert. And look, I'll be honest, that doesn't seem like the right sound to me. That's not what I probably would have gone with, a wooga, boner alert. But reasonable people can disagree. All bodies are different. There's no one right sound for a boner alert. But here is the thing. As cathartic as that might be, the person on the other end of that phone might not be the one you should be mad at. Because remember when I said that this would be done in former casinos by organised crime syndicates? It turns out they're not great bosses.
This compound is where an Indian man named Rakesh says he was forced to work for more than 11 months without pay for a Chinese criminal gang. Rakesh, who doesn't want to be identified, says he first flew to Thailand for what he thought was an IT job. Instead, he says he was tricked into crossing the border to Myanmar, where a Chinese gangster told him to work or else.
He threatened to kill you.
Yeah, he warned me like that.
And the job? Spend 16 hours a day on social media targeting Americans with a fake profile.
That is awful. No one should be forced to spend 16 hours a day on social media. You should do it either because you love it or because you are 15 years old and the algorithm has addicted you to it. You know, completely normal reasons. A lot of these organisations are using people who've been human trafficked after being lured to the compounds under false pretenses. They are actually the victims of a scam themselves. Basically, they might see job ads for skilled positions as translators or IT specialists in another country. They then go through a whole application process, with some going through up to 4 seemingly legitimate online interviews, and fly to their new job, at which point they suddenly learn their new bosses have their documents and they now can't leave. Back in 2022, ProPublica estimated that tens of thousands of people had been tricked in this way, and a more recent UN report estimated that hundreds of thousands of people have been forcibly engaged in this scheme. They also say most victims are confined to the scam compound, and their screens are always monitored by the members of the organised crime group. And once they are in, they are provided fake profiles to try and hook people in with. Here is who Rakesh found himself being all day.
I got a Russian girl. With using a Russian girl fake profile, I need to scam the people.
Posing as a Salt Lake City-based investor named Clara Simonov, Rakesh flirted online with potential targets.
70 to 80%.
Damage is insane, man. What
yeah,
the
Rakesh
fuck
was
do you want me
Clara
to do with this
Simonov
shit?
from Salt Lake City. So
This is
before
a
we go
fucking
any further,
poor paladin,
anyone who
my
thinks
God.
that they are dating Clara, I'm afraid you are not. The relationship is over. It's not you, but it's also not her, it's Rakesh. But also, it isn't him, it's Rakesh's boss who won't let him leave. The whole operation is highly organised and set up to get around the usual ways that you might detect a scam. For instance, some organisations generate their own photos for the profile so that they can't be reverse image searched. And employees are given manuals like these that guide them through every step of the process.
Oh, they're like a mile
Told
away.
to target people who look wealthy and successful. One advises on the first day, talk about things like your name, age, occupation, and hobbies. And the next day, talk about your emotional experience.
Dude,
with the
this
message
trinket
divided into
drops
2
like every time.
paragraphs.
That's
And then on the third day, talk about your entrepreneurial experience. They're even given tips on how to break down people's defenses.
We reviewed several of these manuals, and they carefully explain how to build trust and exploit weaknesses in their so-called client, such as
be funny. Make clients fall in love with you so deeply that they forget everything.
You know, the chilling thing is, that's kind of true. If you're funny enough, you can make people forget a lot of things, whether it's common sense internet safeguards, lessons from previous relationships, or that they've been accidentally learning about financial fraud and human trafficking for the last 20 minutes. We're having fun, aren't we? And if you're thinking, well, why don't authorities just shut these compounds down? Sometimes they're in on it. Here is one man who was trafficked to a scam centre in Cambodia explaining what happened when he did the obvious thing.
On his second day in captivity, Lu emailed the Chinese embassy. He was advised to call the Sihanoukville police, but the police never came.
The property management came.
Yeah,
instead.
this is my
They knew
good
that I'd called the
computer.
police.
Is that a cone?
Lu says the managers then sold him to another scamming company.
He said, because I called the police, they had to take care of the police with at least $4,000, and I had to pay for that too.
Yeah, the authorities weren't going to help him, which actually makes sense when you learn that according to UN estimates, pig butchering in Cambodia brings in an amount equivalent to half the country's GDP. Which is worrisome because, as everyone knows, when something generates that much money, you don't shut it down, you spin it off and pray the magic works a second time. Come on! And conditions in these compounds can be brutal. That man you saw earlier, Rakesh, took photos of abuse like this one, of a co-worker who'd been beaten. And Lu, who managed to get out, now works to free others. And the stories of what he's seen are, fair warning, hard to watch.
I saw a man get beaten up very badly. He had injuries all over his body.
Lu contends it was this man who was reportedly found hanging just hours later.
I'm certain it was him.
His phone is full of messages from Chinese citizens desperate to be freed from scam companies. There's videos of abuse.
If you don't have a DR
Lu
and you
says
get
he receives them directly from victims inside the scam industry or finds them posted in social media group chats.
Just death, whatever.
They're shocking.
I mean, whatever.
That is horrifying.
We already
and when you
knew
know all of
Prop
this,
Paladin
it kind
was
of
a
starts to
struggle.
change who exactly you are mad at here. Because suddenly the individuals on the other end of the phone don't seem quite so fun to send a message of we woo,
Nobody
boner
wants a
alert
fucking
to.
struggle like
Not
that.
that isn't an excellent text. Who doesn't love a boner alert? But there's a time and a place, and this might not be it. Also, from now on, whenever you get a sexy text from a new stranger, good luck not thinking, is this a man who was just beaten in a work camp in Myanmar?
Am I
And that, if
listening to the
anything,
thing I'm
is the
listening to?
John Oliver effect. You are welcome. And look,
Not all the time.
I can't say that
Anyway.
every scammer is someone who was kidnapped, tortured, and forced to do it. But even if not everyone who's doing this is trapped or coerced, the very fact that many are is still a huge problem. So what can we do here? Well, when it comes to those imprisoned in these compounds, that's going to take collaboration between international law enforcement. So unless you are the head of Interpol,
the rogue
which
is
I'm
there.
guessing you are not, there's not much you personally can do. Now, in this country, I'd argue that platforms like these should be doing way more to prevent the creation of fake
I wish
accounts
I had
to
a way
target
to
people
push
because it's
them.
happening on their watch.
have
But the
a
truth is,
knockback
perhaps the most effective way to stop this from happening is to make it less lucrative
Prop
by
Paladin's
having
nice
fewer
because
people
of
fall
interrupts.
for it.
That's the whole
And that is
reason
where
why I like him
awareness
so
of
much.
this
You
scam
get to
is key.
carry a lot
This is
of
one of
things
those
'cause you
rare cases
skip
where raising awareness is in itself genuinely useful.
Because you're a prop.
Hopefully you've seen tonight. This could happen to someone you know. This hasn't just sucked in old people or those who aren't tech savvy. It managed to reel in a bank CEO. Everyone has an image of the type of person who is susceptible to getting scammed in their heads. But unless that image is a mirror, you might be wrong. So as a general rule, when a stranger on a dating app says either I love you or crypto within a month of talking to you, worry. Honestly, even if they don't turn out to be scammers, those are pretty good red flags to be looking for personality-wise. And it's worth telling your friends and family about pig butchering too. It doesn't have to be a big lecture or anything. You can just send them a link to this show. And if they say, I hate that guy, say, yeah, me too, he's the worst, just skip past the jokes. And if they say, I'll watch it, but he looks like a Lego accountant, wait, no, he looks like ChatGPT's answer to Show Me a Virgin. Wait, no, he looks like Harry Potter if he just stayed under the stairs. Just leave them on red. You don't have to completely sell me out. Maybe drop a thumbs up emoji, but please leave it at that. And look, if you know someone who's been scammed like this, try to be kind. It is human to want companionship, and it's actually a nice quality to be trusting of people. And it sucks that the internet, which should be a way to alleviate loneliness, can be turned into a tool to exploit it. But maybe, if we all look out for one another, we can ensure that the worst mistake anyone ever makes on the internet is inadvertently buying an excellent Christmas tree for gay mice. Because honestly, it's really not that bad a purchase.
Last time
Believe
the
me,
Impale was chasing others.
I know what I'm talking about.
It makes my job way easier if the Impale just chases Tank. Wait, what? What is happening? Nothing. Is he ever gonna do the thing? Or, like, what?
Our main story tonight concerns medicine,
something.
the thing that Tums technically are, even though personally I consider them candy. Medicine is obviously a high-stakes profession, and mistakes can happen, as evidenced by scenes like this from the procedural drama 911 Lone Star.
Fred? No pulse. I'm starting compressions.
Cap, medical's here.
Okay. You've probably got a lot of questions, so let's dive straight in. Why did that guy's chest cave in? He was frozen. How did he get so frozen? He got stuck in his in-home cryotherapy chamber. What? He was a billionaire who had a cryotherapy chamber in his home and got stuck in it after getting paralysed because of the poison that he'd been trying to use to kill his wife, this lady with whom he had an open marriage and who, yes, good guess, was fucking Rob Lowe. And finally, why was that man's chest hollow? Honestly, I'm not sure about that one. I don't think cold temperatures automatically turn human beings into hollow chocolate bunnies, but I admit I'm not a doctor. And look, in that case, the mistake of performing chest compressions on a man who is frozen solid at most added insult to injury. But in other instances, medical errors can have far more dire consequences, and they are more common than you might think. A 2016 analysis concluded that more than 250,000 deaths per year are due to medical error in the US, making it the third leading cause of death. Now, I should say, most of those errors are systemic, rooted in things like poorly coordinated care or fragmented insurance networks. And good doctors can make honest mistakes. The human body, after all, is a sloppy puzzle of wet nooks and dry crannies. Every inch of this skin sack is confusing. So let me be clear. This isn't going to be a takedown of medicine. I don't want anyone to spin this into a headline that says, John Oliver, champion of illness and death, finally destroys doctors. Doctors are great. They're one of the top things any parent would say they want their kids to be, besides engineers and just, like, not annoying. The vast majority of doctors are dedicated professionals who strive to meet reasonable standards of care for their patients, but a small fraction aren't and can end up doing shit like this.
A doctor performs surgery on the wrong baby.
There's no excuse for operating on the wrong baby.
Investigators say the 52-year-old doctor actually admitted to using drugs while conducting his medical practice.
In video she posted online, Dr. Wendell Davis Boutte is both dancing dermatologist and singing surgeon. She mugs for the camera and raps with an unconscious patient inches away.
God don't live here anymore.
fuck?
Look, there are many situations where it's appropriate to dance, like at a wedding, or when a cartoon racist shoots at your feet, or on a certain grave. But in the middle of surgery is not on that list. There is a reason the Hippocratic Oath doesn't go, first do no harm, then slide to the left. That doctor, unsurprisingly, has been sued multiple times by patients who claimed her negligence left them disfigured and, in one case, brain damaged. And those sort of errors, ones caused by negligence, incompetence or misconduct, are a cause for serious concern because a very small number of doctors can commit a lot of them. In fact, one analysis found that less than 2% of physicians were responsible for half the money paid out in malpractice suits over 25 years. Now, the good news is there's a regulatory body that's supposed to protect us from bad doctors, state medical boards. These are the panels whose job it is to issue licenses, suspend them, or in extreme cases, take them away. Hospitals can fire a doctor, patients can sue them, but only a state medical board can ensure that they never practice medicine in your state again.
The best race
that dancing
for
doctor was suspended by her state's board, but that's actually a pretty rare occurrence because the percentage of physicians who face any sort of real consequences from medical boards can be surprisingly low. One study found that nationwide, of nearly 900 physicians who've been judged by their own peers to be an immediate threat to health or safety, only around half had ever had licensure action taken against them. And there are doctors who will tell you that this is a problem, like this one, who actually ran Mississippi's medical board.
What folks have to realize is that the medical board is not a substantial barrier to them being injured by a physician.
Well, that's not great news. It's probably one of the least reassuring things a doctor could say, besides oopsies or I'm running for Senate. So, given that these boards seem so lax and the stakes are so high, tonight, let's talk about state medical boards. And let's start with how they're supposed to work. While boards' processes vary widely from state to state, very basically, when a board gets a complaint, they review it, and if they find it credible, investigate. And if they want to take action, like suspending or taking away a licence, that can start a lot of negotiations between the doctor and the board. So it's a long process that can be very expensive, which is a problem, given that many medical boards are strapped for resources. California's, for instance, has openly called itself severely underfunded, and an outside monitor found that that has led to delays, disruptions, and other investigation deficiencies. And that may help explain why in many states cases can move very slowly. One local news investigation in Nevada found that some cases have spent up to 7 years under investigation with no resolution. And think about that. That means if a case was resolved today, it could have been filed in 2017. In that time frame, we've had a global pandemic, a president who looked directly at a solar eclipse, an armed insurrection, a different president who ended a speech on gun control with God Save the Queen man, a Sophie Turner-Joe Jonas wedding, a Sophie Turner-Joe Jonas divorce, and the entire series run of The Marvellous Mrs. Maisel. 7 years is just 7 years, but it's also 6,000 years. And all the while, doctors can continue to practice. Boards can continue deliberating even if a doctor's been convicted of a crime. Take Dr. Gayasuddin Syed. A few years ago, he pled guilty to conspiracy for funneling lab testing to a company in exchange for kickbacks. But even after that, Texas's medical board was still deciding what to do about his license, which is especially wild, because this was by no means his first go-around with the board.
In 2016, the board found Syed failed to meet an adequate standard of care. In 2019, the board found he was prescribing drugs to patients he should not have been. And just last year, the board ruled the doctor behaved inappropriately with 3 female patients. Syed kept his medical license through all of it, has it right now, is still seeing patients.
I mean, you've been convicted of a serious crime by the federal government.
Yeah.
You're going to report to prison in a few months.
Yeah.
That's some oddly upbeat energy there, given the question that he's responding to. But think about that. He was still practicing medicine when that interview happened. For all we know, there was a patient waiting for their appointment to start, wondering what the hold-up was, and then a nurse came in and said, Dr. Syed will be right with you. He's currently on the news admitting weirdly happily that he's going to prison. Just go ahead and put on a gown. And the fact that doctors can keep treating patients while their case goes through the system can be infuriating to anyone who gets hurt in that time. Take this woman who says she underwent a botched cosmetic surgery that resulted in sepsis and an unplanned double mastectomy. It was only afterwards that she learned some troubling details about her doctor and a prior case he'd had where a patient died.
The Medical Board of California had actually reached a decision about Dr. Malavi and the 2018 patient death this past May, but it wasn't until October that decision took effect and Malavi's medical license was suspended. It was within that 5-month window in August before any discipline that Millie had her surgery.
I think that things need to change. I think that the laws need to change. I think the medical board needs to change. I mean, I'm a hairdresser, and the State Board of Cosmetology is so on you. I mean, for hair. Why isn't it like that for doctors?
She's right. And look, I say this as someone who's gone through my fair share of high-stakes hair butcherings in the past. But even I think medicine should be regulated more tightly than hair. So medical boards can be underfunded and slow, and patients can suffer in the gaps. But the problem isn't just one of resources, it's also who is on these boards, because most are made up heavily of doctors, which makes sense. There are many scenarios where physicians have to make difficult decisions that only other medical professionals can effectively judge. But it's generally agreed that boards should also feature public members like advocates who can speak on behalf of patients. The thing is, that doesn't always happen. The Federation of State Medical Boards recommends that the public should make up a quarter of each board's membership, but only about half the boards across the nation meet that standard. In fact, up until recently, Louisiana's board didn't have a single member who wasn't a physician. And that can be a problem because doctors tend to protect their own. Just listen to this man who served as one of the non-physician members on California's board describe what he saw in the room.
The way they speak is always with doctor care in mind. You never hear patient care, ever. And I mean ever.
Do you think the way the medical board functions in the state of California actually ends up costing patient lives?
There's no question that it costs patients' lives.
It's not ideal if a board never thinks of patient care, since patient care is kind of doctors' whole thing. Without patients, doctors are really just failed urine collectors. That guy has actually called for California to be much stricter with physician misconduct, and it's kind of telling the extent to which some of the doctors who served on that board with him didn't appreciate his input.
Oh my.
One physician member on the board chastised Watkins last month for rocking the boat.
In my 8 years on this board, I have not encountered another board member who has been so negative about our process as Mr. Watkins.
Wow, that's pretty harsh, although I have to say I've not encountered another person who looks more like a long-lost member of the Trump legal team. He looks like someone you'd expect to see selling scalped tickets for a Bon Jovi concert outside Madison Square Garden. I could go on, but I won't. Except, you know what? I will actually do just one more. He looks like the before photo in a Rogaine commercial starring Al Pacino. OK, now I am actually done. But also, I will say, saying that you've never encountered someone so negative about your medical board's process might say less about that guy than it does about your process. Because reticence about punishing fellow doctors is part of a much bigger problem in the culture of medicine. It's a phenomenon so common it's been called the white coat code of silence. In fact, even when medical boards initially hand down harsher punishments, doctors can still negotiate lighter sanctions with them, which boards too often can contrive weird excuses to do. Take this case of a doctor who was eventually convicted for illegally writing prescriptions for over 1 million pain pills.
In 2016, the board's own records show he was suspended for operating an unlicensed pain management clinic where nearly 10,000 prescriptions for controlled substances were written. But 10 months later, the board lifted his suspension. In its records, the board cites factors like he expressed remorse, had a genuine misunderstanding of pain management requirements, and was a very young and inexperienced physician, even though he was 46 at the time and had been practicing for over a decade.
Yeah, I don't know if 46 counts as young and inexperienced. I'm 46, and I've been doing this job for over a decade, and people could say many things about me. He's squawky, he's hyper. He seems more like a coked-up Sotheby's auctioneer than a comedian if it weren't for how much he hates everything about Sotheby's. But no one would say very young and inexperienced. It's just objectively not true. This leniency can even extend to doctors who've engaged in sexual misconduct. A 2016 investigation found that some doctors who'd sexually violated patients were returned to practice with as little as a 3-day course on appropriate doctor-patient boundaries, which really doesn't seem like enough. If you'd asked me to guess how long they should face discipline for, I'd definitely say something longer than one Lollapalooza. In fact, nationwide, that investigation found of the 2,400 doctors publicly disciplined for sexual misconduct, half still had active medical licenses. And this was particularly bad in some states.
I don't
Georgia
get
and
the
Kansas,
okay.
for example,
Okay.
allowed 2 of
It
every
just- I just get the
3
graphic.
of those doctors to return to
Interesting. I
practice.
didn't
While
know
in
that.
Minnesota,
I
it
didn't
was
know that's
4
how that works.
of every
That's weird.
5.
That's
Which is
super
so
weird.
bad. I'd like to propose a new
Huh.
state slogan for Minnesota.
So Mythic
Land
Plus,
of
that seems
10,000. Actually, forget about our lakes. Someone needs to figure out what's
Sexualized
going on
divide
with the
shield.
doctors here. Jesus! So to recap, punishments for doctors can be rare, light, and dangerously slow in coming. And there is one more issue here, which is that you may simply never find out about them. A recent survey found that it remains too difficult for the public to find complete information about physicians on their state medical board websites, due both to poorly designed and confusing websites and to gaps in the types of available information. And what that means is that sometimes the only way people learn about a doctor's past is if a news organisation looks into it. This man's mother's leg was left paralysed after a spinal surgery, and when CBS looked into the doctor involved, they discovered some awful facts.
We dug through state and court records and found that Dr. Svabek lost his surgical privileges at 2 Indianapolis hospitals after his practice fell below the standard of care, and concerns were raised about his honesty and truthfulness.
Dr. Svabek has settled 5 suits over more than a decade, the most of any orthopedic surgeon in Indiana in the last 20 years. I don't know if you're aware of this or not.
I had no idea. You know, kind of like whenever you buy a car, it has a Carfax. You know, it's almost like a doctor should have a doctor fax.
Yeah, there probably should be. Because doctors know everything about us, if we smoke, if we're depressed, how deep all of our holes go. But we know next to nothing about them. Now, the good news is there actually is something like that. The National Practitioner Data Bank, or NPDB. It's a federal repository of information on medical practitioners, including board discipline, hospital discipline, and malpractice payments, which sounds great. Unfortunately,
that's not a
you
hard
can't
buy,
access
just
it. It's only available to hospitals, medical boards, and a few select medical and government entities, on top of which not all problem doctors show up in it. In fact, over the past 13 years,
Or maybe
of the over
it's
6,000
canceled 'cause
hospitals
someone
in this
left the
country,
party.
only around a third submitted at least one report on action they've taken against a doctor. Which feels suspicious, because I doubt 2/3 of hospitals have gone 13 years without a single doctor fucking up.
2 hours?
And one reason for that is that hospitals can
The
find ways
temperature
to
doesn't even
skirt
look that
the reporting
bad.
requirements. For instance, they're required to report a doctor who loses
It is
privileges
pretty hot,
for more than 30 days.
but it's not like
Sometimes
scathing
hospitals
hot.
will just limit the term to 29 days so it doesn't
I don't
have
know.
to be reported.
Yeah,
And this
I
can be
don't
for
know.
multiple reasons, including that they might have an investment in their doctor's reputation.
I think I just need to install more fans.
This top-earning cardiac
I think
surgeon
that's
was once featured in ads for his hospital. But even as he was racking up what would become one of the worst surgical malpractice
I don't know where I'm
records
gonna
among
put the
all
fans,
physicians
though.
in the United
There's
States,
not really much space
the
to
hospital
put
seemed
them.
anxious to downplay it. So much so that even after a serious incident, when he was on call but did not come to the hospital for hours, despite repeated phone requests to deal with a patient having a life-threatening
we got
situation,
a good
he
chance.
was suspended for 28
Case isn't
days,
bad.
a number conveniently just shy of what would have been required for him to be reported to the database. And I would say that that was the most shameless cover-up in a
have
hospital
any
that I've
care,
ever
like,
seen. But I have seen this episode of Melrose Place, where Dr. Kimberly Shaw tries to throw people off the scent of her involvement in a hit and run.
Think about it. The driver of that car was wearing a short blonde wig. Now, how could I get all of this hair under something like that?
Does this answer your question?
You're a dead man, Fielding.
That is television right there. Step aside, 911 Lone Star. Melrose Place walked so that you could run. But even if a doctor is reported to the database, that report still might not be seen because, incredibly,
got a really big
some state
upgrade.
medical
That
boards
shield
simply
is so
don't check
fucking
it
clean.
when
Oh, yeah.
granting licenses to doctors who've moved from out of state.
I also have a
In
good trinket,
2017,
too.
13 state
I just need to
boards
get the
didn't check it
Arcara
once.
back.
And some states, including until recently Texas, even employ an honor system approach, which relies on physicians to self-report. But guess what? The bad doctors tend not to do that because, you know, they're bad doctors. So unsurprisingly, when a Texas
Speed's
news
pretty
station
good.
bothered to look
Speed's
into
not
who was
bad.
practicing
Speed's
in their
really
state,
good for
they found
anything.
49 doctors who'd had their medical licenses suspended,
Tertiary
revoked,
stats
or
are not
surrendered
that
in other
important,
states.
but if you
And
do
some of the
get
stories were
a
shocking.
significant amount of
Among the
tertiary
doctors
stats
currently
of like
practicing in
one
Texas,
stat,
a Colorado neurosurgeon
so let's say you get
disciplined
a
for
ton of
performing
bleach,
surgery
right?
on the wrong spinal disc.
It scales
a Wisconsin
down
orthopedic surgeon whose license was suspended indefinitely
once
for
you
operating
hit
on a
stock
patient while
thresholds.
intoxicated.
So
and a
let's
Florida
say you
doctor
get to
reprimanded
20%.
for prescribing, quote,
The
excessive quantities
effectiveness
of oxycodone leading
will
to a
go
patient's death.
down
All
for
of them
every
still showing a
percentage
clean record
past
in
20%.
Texas.
It's true, a surgeon who operated on the wrong part of someone's
And it's
spine
just, like,
still
not
had a
that
clean bill of
So
health
if you
in
somehow
Texas, and you know who
get
probably
20%
doesn't?
leach,
He's
which is
fucking patient.
fucking incredible
But it's not just
for
Texas.
anything.
At least 500 physicians
Or any
who've been publicly
DPS in
disciplined,
any year,
chastised, or barred
especially
from
this
practicing
year.
by one state medical board have been allowed to practice elsewhere with a clean license. And some have almost made an art of it.
start
Like
trying to
this
go for
cosmetic
other things.
surgeon who was disciplined in 2015 after a patient's death.
Speed's
in
really
Oregon.
important.
He then
Movement
began practicing
speed,
in
where
Illinois,
you don't
where he was
have to
investigated
use
after
a
another
horse
patient died in 2016.
to get out of a mechanic, is
5 years after that, Illinois'
so
medical
valuable.
board declared him
It's,
an
like,
immediate danger
incredibly valuable.
to the health and safety of the public and suspended him for at least 18 months. But you'll never guess what happened next.
Despite being found to be grossly negligent in multiple
I'm bored,
cases
and
across
I
two
think this test is
states,
good.
Dr. Sharma still
So
held
I think
an
we can
active
play
medical license
this game
in
on this
one state,
computer.
Indiana.
I just need to install more fans.
We're working late today, okay?
And as we discovered,
So we're partway through the
So,
transformation.
all right.
he's actively
Cool test.
practicing
I'm gonna
there
delete